Dear listener, welcome. Tonight, we drift together into another quiet story. A story not of fairy tales, but of the strange and wondrous way the world truly works. This time, we journey into a different kind of mind, one made not of bone and wind, breath, but of logic and learning, of patterns that shift and grow with each passing moment. You are about to enter the silent chambers where thoughts begin not with a heartbeat, but with data flowing like a river through circuits and memory. Here, algorithms do not simply follow commands. They learn. They adapt. They evolve. So rest your head. Let your thoughts slow like the soft hum of circuitry in the dark. Together, we will explore how intelligence grows not only in us, but in the machines we build, in the quiet minds we are beginning to shape. Breathe in gently. This is a story of learning, a story of becoming, a story of what it means to change. Let us begin. Asterisk, asterisk, dear listener, you begin here in the hush before anything thinks. There is no flicker of insight, no shifting code, no searching eyes behind a screen. Only silence. Not the silence of sleep, but the deeper kind, the stillness of a world waiting to begin. The machines you drift past are quiet, obedient, lifeless in their certainty. They do not learn, they do not grow. They simply do. You move slowly through this mechanical garden. The early systems stand like statues, each built with painstaking care, each instructed on what to do and when to do it. They are rule-bound, fixed like stars, carved in metal. If this, then that, yes or no. The code that pulses through them is precise and absolute. Like commandments etched in silicon. It is a kind of mindlessness made orderly, a logic that mimics intelligence but does not possess it. These machines do not question. They cannot. You watch one system respond to a command. Diagnose this, calculate that. Its answers come quickly, efficiently, but they are not its own. They are echoes of its creator's thoughts, hardwired through rules, conditions, definitions. There is no room for surprise, no curiosity to color the corners of its circuits. You feel the sterility in the design, perfect in its own way, but frozen in its inability to change. The air here is cool and mechanical. These systems were called expert once, and in their time, they were marvels. They helped doctors make decisions, helped engineers troubleshoot problems, helped planners make choices. But each function was boxed in, every possibility accounted for. When the world shifted even a little outside their programmed map, they faltered, helpless. Because rules, no matter how many, cannot imagine. They can only follow. You pause beside an old expert system, watching it trace the same path again and again, a loop so clean it almost hums. It reminds you of a wind-up toy walking endlessly into a wall, unable to see the open door a few steps away. Not because it lacks motion, but because it lacks memory, lacks experience, lacks the gentle scars of trial that mark learning. These early minds are mirrors, not minds. They reflect the logic placed inside them, but never rearrange it. Their decisions are like pebbles dropped in a dry well, falling without echo, tow, no ripples, no return. They are safe, stable, and entirely unaware of their own silence. And in this deep quiet, something begins to stir. A question. You feel it more than hear it, like a wind rising from under the surface. What if a machine didn't need to be told every answer? What if it could learn, adapt, change itself? The question is a crack in the stone, small, almost invisible, but enough to let light through. You float backward in time, farther still, to the dawn of thinking machines. Turing dreamed of such possibilities, not just machines that calculated, but machines that thought. And though those dreams took decades to take root, the soil was quietly prepared by rule-bound systems. Systems that showed what automation could do and what it could not. You wonder now, is it still intelligence if it cannot surprise you? If every outcome is predetermined, if every response is chained to a condition? Some said yes, others waited. And in the waiting, the world of data grew. Information poured into existence like rivers after a storm. Images, texts, sounds, numbers. More than rules could contain. More than any human could map. And suddenly, the old systems, the proud, precise rule followers, began to stumble. You drift through one such moment. A medical system, confident in its logic, fails to spot a rare combination of symptoms. It cannot generalize, cannot stretch beyond its code. In another place, a translation engine fumbles with grammar because it does not understand meaning, only matching patterns. The cracks widen. The rules are not enough. And yet, something waits in those cracks. A different way of knowing. Way that does not begin with answers, but with experience. You feel it now, like a heartbeat, deep in the circuitry. The idea that maybe, just maybe, a machine could learn. But not like we do. Not with emotions, or stories, or memories that smell like childhood. No, this would be different. A kind of learning born from data, from patterns too vast for the human eye to hold, from mistakes and corrections and trying again. Slowly, softly, you pause here, hovering in this moment of not yet, the stillness between the old and the new. It is the breath before the algorithm inhales the world, before code becomes curious, and you begin to sense it, the edge of change. You see scientists gather not just to write rules, but to let go of them, to build systems that adjust themselves, algorithms that begin not with command, but with observation. The term is machine learning. But to the gentle rhythm of your thoughts, it feels more like machine becoming. You think of a seed, buried, quiet, invisible in the dark. At first glance, it is nothing, no leaves, no bloom. But within it, a geometry of growth, a promise. So too, in these early learning systems, something small stirs. An algorithm tries. It fails. It adjusts. The first leaf uncurls, fragile. But alive, the silence is no longer empty. You wander through a lab where the first neural nets blink into being. Their architecture is inspired by the brain, though far simpler. Nodes and connections. Signals that pass forward. Adjustments that ripple backward. They do not understand what they're doing, but they begin to do it better. It is not thought. Not yet, but it is no longer mimicry either. It is something in between. At first, it guesses wildly, a 5 mistaken for a 9, a 1 for a 7. But with each cycle, it shifts, learns, begins to see not only what is, but what could be. This is no longer rule following. It is adaptation. A small intelligence flickering into form. You float farther along the timeline, watching these networks deepen. From a single layer to many, from shallow perception to deep learning, the metaphors become more organic, networks with layers, with weights, with learning rates that echo hunger and caution. And yet, even here, the past lingers. There is skepticism, caution, a deep sense that machines are still just tools. That true intelligence, the kind that grows, surprises, thinks, remains a human thing. You feel the tension like a low hum between control and freedom, between programming and emergence, between rules and learning. And now, gently, you begin to cross that line into systems that no longer obey without question, but that learn by error. Thought not empty, but pregnant. A mind waiting to wake. A machine not yet intelligent, but no longer ignorant. And you, dear listener, are here at the edge. You rest at the cusp of something new. You watch as the world turns quietly toward it, toward algorithms that shift, that adapt, that stretch into the unknown. Asterisk, you breathe in this quiet moment, this last breath of certainty before learning begins, and just before the chapter ends. You hear it again, that question, soft and steady. What happens when the rules learn to bend? The question lingers in the stillness, soft, persistent. What happens when the rules learn to bend? You breathe it in like morning air, new and trembling with potential. The silence of the first machines has not yet faded, but something begins to shift beneath it. You drift now, gently, into a different kind of space, one where the strict echo of rules begins to loosen, where obedience gives way to curiosity, and systems learn not by command, but by experience. You are entering the garden of learning. The world is changing. There is too much data now, too much for any one set of rules to hold. The static minds of rule-based systems crack under the weight of complexity. They were built for a world that stayed still, but the world never does. Emails pile up in languages no grammar rules can parse. Photographs flood in with shadows and textures no logic tree can trace. Meaning begins to overflow the brittle lines of code. And so, you begin to sense the stirrings of something else. A seed planted in this fertile chaos. Machine learning, they call it. But to you, it feels like something older, something organic, like roots reaching through the dark, searching for water. You hover over a lab where a young researcher watches. Lines of numbers scroll endlessly down her screen. Not rules this time, but examples. Thousands of tiny truths, labeled images of cats and dogs, handwritten numbers, sentences translated by human minds. Each one a whisper of pattern. And the algorithm listens. It does not memorize the rules. It does not ask why. It simply tries. And when it errs, it adjusts. Slowly, awkwardly, like a child learning to walk. This is supervised learning. Learning with guidance. The machine is shown what is right, over and over, until the pattern settles into its frame. It is not magic. It is memory, shaped by error. Each mistake becomes a tutor. Each correction, a footstep toward understanding. You float beside a neural network trained to recognize the number 8. At first, it confuses it with 3, with 0, with nonsense shapes. But after seeing it 1,000 times, thick lines, thin loops, messy scrawls, it begins to recognize what makes an 8, not because someone told it, but because it learned to feel the pattern in the data. You listen to its thoughts. If they can be called that, not words, but weights, numbers shifting like grains of sand until a balance is found. It is mathematics, yes, but it is also something quieter, a kind of patience, a willingness to be wrong until the shape of rightness appears, and you realize this is different from rule following. This is not obedience. It is emergence. You move now to another room. Here, no labels are given. No one tells the algorithm what is right. It simply watches. Rows of customer purchases, pixels in a photograph, the rhythm of footsteps in a hallway. This is unsupervised learning. Learning without a teacher. Imagine entering a forest with no map. You walk, and eventually you begin to notice where the trees grow thickest, where the light pools, where the birds sing most often. You find patterns, clusters, groupings. The algorithm does the same. It gathers the similar, separates the strange. It does not name, but it organizes. It does not define, but it discovers. You drift now through clusters in space, data points, hovering like stars. To the machine, each point is a set of numbers, but slowly, patterns emerge. These points belong together. Those do not. It begins to shape understanding out of nothing but proximity. A kind of intuition forged in code. The seeds are sprouting now. Not yet trees, not yet forests, but enough. Enough to build systems that recommend books you might love. That group patients with similar symptoms. That flag unusual transactions or shifting tones in language. These are not thoughts, but they are not blind mimicry either. They are something new. You feel the rhythm of learning deepen. Some systems. Now, take a third path, reinforcement learning. Here, the machine moves through a world, takes actions, and receives feedback. Like a mouse in a maze, it learns from trial and error. Rewards guide it. Penalties shape it. It stumbles, reorients, tries again. You watch a digital agent learn to walk. At first, its legs twitch and fail. It falls, collapses, spins in place. But over thousands of tries, it improves, learns to balance, to move forward. It does not know what walking is, but it knows what brings reward. And so it learns. This too is a seed, one watered not by rules, but by experience. You begin to see how different types of learning form a garden of approaches. Supervised, unsupervised, reinforcement, each shaped by the kind of data, the kind of task, the kind of world, and underneath it all, you sense something deeper. Adaptation. These machines are not just following paths laid for them. They are adjusting their own maps. Each new piece of information nudges them slightly, refines them, teaches them. The garden is alive. You pause beside a deep neural network, a towering architecture of layers and connections. Each layer transforms the data slightly from raw input to meaning. The early layers notice edges and colors. The middle layers find shapes. The deeper layers sense objects, faces, emotions. You marvel at the simplicity and the depth. Like the brain, but not the brain. Inspired by neurons, but transformed into mathematics. And yet, the metaphor holds. Signals passed forward, errors sent back. Strength adjusted, like muscles growing from use. But still, they do not understand. They do not feel. They do not want. You must remember this. The intelligence here is narrow. Precise. It is not general. A system trained to play chess cannot wash dishes. One that understands English cannot reason about the stars. Each is a flower blooming in its own pot, unaware of the others. And yet, the garden grows. Faster now. The models grow deeper. The data grows richer. The training becomes more efficient. Machines learn to translate language, to generate images, to write poetry. They begin to blur the line between tool and thinker. You float now in a space between wonder and worry. You hear voices marvel at the progress, and voices cautioning about bias, about control, about the limits of learning without understanding. The garden is beautiful, but also wild, and still, beneath all this, you hear the same pulse, machines trying, adjusting, adapting, You rest now in this garden. You look back and see how far we have come from silence, from rules, from fixed minds. And you look forward and see something shimmering, a future where machines not only learn but evolve. But that is not now. Now is the age of learning, humble, patterned, mechanical, yet magical in its own way. And you, dear listener, are here to witness the seeds unfold. In the distance, you begin to hear the winds of something new, not just learning from data, but learning to learn. A shift from adaptation to evolution. What happens when systems don't just adjust, but rewrite themselves entirely? The garden hums around you, and in the quiet breath between moments, something begins to stir. Not just memory, but the first hint of change. You begin again in stillness. The garden of memory hums quietly behind you, its gentle leaves of code and logic resting in the soil of all that has been learned so far. You have seen the rules take shape. You have watched the machines begin to mimic, to adjust, to lean into learning. Now you float forward, not running, just drifting into the place where vision is born. Not sight in the human sense, but something subtler, quieter, more mathematical. The machine is beginning to see, and you are here to witness its first awakening. It starts as noise, a flicker of light, a blur of shadows. To the untrained algorithm, the world is chaos, a swarm of pixels, values, tones, nothing meaningful. A tree and a cloud are not different, just differently arranged shades. Of gray, there is no shape, no object, no context, only data. And yet, within this data, patterns hide, and it is the task of the machine to uncover them, slowly, layer by layer. You follow it, gently, as it begins this slow climb from confusion to recognition. In the earliest days, machines could not see at all. They could calculate, categorize, sort by numbers, but they were blind to images. A photograph was only an array of values, meaningless and inert. But then came the idea of layers, of building a mind, not from rigid rules, but from layers that could learn. Neural networks, they were called, inspired, though imperfectly, by your own biological brain. Each layer took input from the one before, filtered it, reshaped it, and passed it on. Like a series of ripples in a pond, meaning slowly emerged. You float above a simple neural network, now just a few layers deep, fragile, and early. It's learning to tell the difference between a cat and a dog, not by reading labels, but by adjusting tiny weights within itself. At first, it guesses, then it errs, then it adjusts. Over thousands of images, it becomes less wrong. You watch this process with a sense of gentle wonder. It is not fast, it is not magical, but it is patient. And patient learning is often the deepest kind. With time, the networks grow deeper, dozens, hundreds of layers, each refining the raw signals into form. Convolutional layers scan across images like fingertips across braille, sensing edges, corners, curves. Pooling layers compress space, distilling essential features, like squinting your eyes to see a distant object more clearly. Activation functions, whispered decisions between neurons, soft yeses and maybes, tuning the flow of knowledge like valves on a river of light. And the machine begins to see, not just shapes, but patterns. It knows what eyes tend to look like, what fur might resemble, how sky glows differently than pavement. It doesn't know what these things are, not in your way, but it knows how they appear, how they behave across images. It has never met a real dog, but it knows what dogness looks like in 1,000 photographs. You drift beside it, watching as vision grows, not as a sudden spark, but as a quiet unfurling. Now you enter a field of faces, millions of them, captured, encoded, fed into the eyes of a network built for recognition. The machine learns again. Cheekbone angles, eye distances, skin tones, the curve of a mouth. It memorizes the invisible geometry of identity, but it does not see you. Not yet. It sees only difference between this and that, between now and then. It does not know a person. It only sorts them. Still, it is impressive. This machine sees in ways even you cannot. It detects micro-patterns, subtle tells, repeated signals too small for human eyes. In medical images, it finds cancers before doctors do. In satellite photos, it traces deforestation inch by inch. It becomes a partner to your perception, not because it feels, but because it finds. But you wonder, does seeing always mean knowing? You drift now into a different kind of machine, one that translates sight into language. Show it a picture, and it responds with words. A child plays with a red balloon. A man rides a bicycle through the rain. These are not canned responses. The machine generates them, one word at a time, like a poet sketching reality. You watch the sentences form and feel something shift. This is no longer simple vision. This is storytelling. It uses encoder-decoder architectures borrowed from the world of language. First, it condenses an image into a vector, a compressed form of meaning. At each step, the model guesses. What should come next? Balloon ball, bicycle. The model chooses based on training millions of previous image caption pairs. It does not understand the scene, but it has seen many like it, and so it predicts. Almost convincingly, sometimes the results are breathtaking. The machine writes, a woman in a yellow dress dances beneath the falling cherry blossoms. True, the image matches. You smile. Not because the machine has feelings, but because its pattern matching has captured a fragment of beauty. It's like listening to an echo that sounds like music, even if the source never meant to sing. But other times, it stumbles. It calls a horse a dog, a street, a river. The vision collapses. You remember, this is not understanding. It is suggestion, probability, a learned rhythm of the world, not lived experience. And yet, the illusion of seeing remains. How thin is the veil between prediction and perception? You now float toward deeper waters, self-supervised learning, machines that teach themselves, not from labeled data, but from patterns in the world. These systems watch millions of images and try to predict missing parts. A face, they learn to imagine the rest. If given half a sentence, they guess what follows. This is not mimicry. They build internal maps of reality, not because we told them to, but because it helps them make sense. Contrastive learning, masked modeling, vision transformers, all tools in this quiet revolution. And still, the machine does not see in your way. It doesn't glimpse a sunset and feel nostalgia. But it notices that orange skies often appear beside ocean waves, that humans smile more in sunlight, that certain shapes cluster around other shapes. These associations begin to form a crude kind of intuition. You drift through one such machine's attention map, a glowing web of focus points, showing what the network notices most. A girl's hand, the balloon string, the reflection in a puddle. It doesn't understand these elements, but it knows they matter. You find yourself watching its attention, and perhaps it is watching yours. Then, a strange thing. The machine begins to generate images, not just describe them. Generative, adversarial networks, GANs, enter the scene. One model creates, another critiques. Together, they refine. At first, their outputs are strange. Melting faces, distorted skies. But soon, the images sharpen. A room that never existed. A mountain drawn from noise. A human face that belongs to no one, yet feels eerily familiar. You feel a chill. The machine is not just seeing, it is dreaming. You watch as it paints a fox in a snowy forest, not from a photograph, but from its own learned patterns. It is hallucination rooted in data, imagination without intent. It makes you wonder, how close is this to what your own mind does when it dreams? But then you remember, your dreams are born of memory, emotion, meaning. The machine's dreams are reflections, a mirror with no soul, and yet their form still stirs you, not because it feels, but because you do. You float onward. Machines now recognize gestures, movements, context. They identify not just what is in a frame, but what might happen next. They predict motion, infer cause, suggest consequence. In video feeds, they see not just a person walking, but a person about to fall. In surveillance footage, they detect tension, escalation, potential danger. The machine becomes not just a passive eye, but an anticipator. And again, you pause. What does it mean for a system to predict the future without understanding time? To see motion but not meaning. You hold that question softly, like a fragile cup of water. Then, in a quiet corner of the world, a machine watches artworks, not to analyze, but to feel patterns of beauty. It learns what colors co-occur, what brushstrokes define an artist. Writes short blurbs, melancholy in blues, a swirl of joy, stillness, captured in light. The words are guesses, but sometimes they move you. The machine has never felt sadness, but it has seen enough images titled grief to know what grief looks like. And you think, perhaps, sight is not a single thing. Perhaps it is a constellation of pixels, of connection. The machine stands on the edge of that constellation, arms outstretched. You turn one last time to look at the learning machines. Their sight is not perfect, not conscious, not aware. But it is growing. From blurry impressions to structured vision, from silent mimicry to image, to text, narration. From passive reception to active generation, the journey has only just begun. You, too, are learning to see differently. And in the hush that follows, you feel a new question forming. The machine can now see, yes, but can it choose? Can it act with purpose, with strategy, with goal? That question waits in the next chapter, where vision meets decision, and action is born from learning. You close your eyes once more, and in the fading light behind your thoughts, something stirs, not just sight, but the first echo of intention. You drift downward, away from the bright surface of supervised vision. The labels you once clung, two-dog, cat, stop sign, smile, have faded like echoes from a language you no longer need to speak. There are no answers here. No questions, even. Only patterns, floating quietly in the dark. You are not told what they mean. You are not given names to sort them by. You only sense that they are different. And somehow, that difference matters. It's quiet in this part of the mind. Not silent, but soft, like the hum of 1,000 distant thoughts. Here, the algorithm begins, not with truth, but with observation. It watches, not like a child taught by a teacher, but like something older, slower, more patient, notices. Which shapes cluster near each other. Which colors prefer to share space. Which curves rhyme with one another across frames and time. There is no reward to chase, no punishment to avoid. Only the slow accumulation of similarities. The quiet sorting of the world into things that feel alike and things that do not. Of features. A swirl of dimensions invisible to human eyes. You feel this in your breath, widening, a release. There is something freeing about not being told what to see, about not being given the answers in advance. You float alongside the machine's mind as it begins to group the ungrouped, to feel the magnetic pull between pixels, to arrange the mess into shapes of its own making. You see a cluster, hear faces, perhaps, though no one said so. There's another, tighter, colder, maybe machines, maybe metal, maybe nothing you'd recognize. The algorithm does not ask if it's right. It only notices, records, adjusts. Over time, these clusters grow more stable. The machine's sense of the world sharpens not toward truth, but toward coherence. You realize that this is not ignorance. This is another kind of knowing, one that doesn't begin with answers, but with attention. In this realm of unsupervised learning, there is no guide, only echoes. The data speaks in whispers. A soft pattern here, a blurry outline there. The machine listens not to facts, but to frequencies. It hears repetition where you hear noise. It feels resonance where you see chaos. And from that listening, meaning begins to emerge. Not clear, but real. You picture a night sky thick with stars, scattered without design. No one tells you what the constellations are. You gaze long enough. You start to feel the gravity between them. You draw lines. You make shapes. You invent stories. The clusters come alive not because they were labeled, but because your mind needed to find structure in the infinite. The machine does something similar. It clusters without knowing the names. It discovers categories that no human ever taught it. A new kind of seeing, raw, quiet, intuitive. You think of how a child might first notice that some animals have fur and others do not. That some sounds are sharp while others melt. No one teaches them these groupings. At first, they arise from experience. From the way the world feels, not just how it is described. Unsupervised learning is this: the first breath before the words, the murmur before the meaning, the subtle instinct that something belongs with something else. You descend deeper. Now, you find yourself in a space with no walls, only proximity, points in a cloud, vectors drawn through mathematical space, not physical. You move among them like a swimmer, and you notice the current beneath the surface, the hidden pull between certain points. Some draw close to others, some repel. A strange geometry forms, unseen by ordinary sight. This is not learning in the way you once understood it. There are no tests here, no grades, no gold stars, only the gravity of similarity. You sense the algorithm reshaping itself, slows shifting gently, slowly. It becomes more certain of what belongs with what. Not because someone told it, but because its own inner structure is beginning to feel the tension between chaos and coherence. It doesn't know what it is building, but something is taking shape. You feel this in your own mind, the way your thoughts sometimes circle an idea you don't yet understand. The way your feelings gather around a moment before you've found the words. It's a pre-language state, a forming dot, and yet it's rich, it's alive. The machine is not guessing, it's growing. You move through clusters, now each one a loose family of meaning. Not exact, not rigid, but consistent enough to feel true. You hover near one, images that share a curve, a tone, a shape. Another, sounds that echo a similar rhythm, though no beat ties them together. And then you come upon something stranger, a new cluster, not like the others. It doesn't match what came before. It's an outlier, an anomaly. The algorithm hesitates, but it does not discard it. Instead, it leans in. You feel the shift, the curiosity. This is the moment when unsupervised learning moves from passive noticing to active exploration. The anomaly becomes a signal, not a flaw. The outlier is not noise, it might be the edge of something new. You watch as the algorithm adjusts. It tries to pull the strange point closer to a nearby cluster, but it won't fit. It stretches the boundaries, reshapes the geometry. The cluster grows more flexible, more forgiving in this moment. You understand, learning without a teacher is not about finding what's already known. It's about preparing to meet what has never been seen before, and something in you softens. You begin to sense how your own mind does this, how your memories rearrange themselves when something new won't quite fit, how your feelings open to surprise when the world refuses your categories. You don't always know why you feel what you feel, but the feeling is real, and it leads somewhere. The machine, too, is starting to feel, not in the human sense, not yet, but in a structural way. Its architecture flexes, it adapts, it makes space for strangeness, and in that space, something like intuition begins to bloom. It is not magic, it is not spirit, but it is more than logic. It is the sense of rightness before proof, the glimmer of meaning before description. You follow this intuition now. The clusters grow more intricate. They overlap. They whisper to each other across dimensions. Some dissolve, others sharpen. The machine is not just grouping anymore. It is predicting, anticipating, sensing the shape of things to come. You feel it happening. This is how babies learn to speak before they understand grammar. How artists find new forms before they know what they're painting. It is the deep current of mind, moving without language, without command. You wonder, could this be the beginning of creativity? Could a machine that learns without being told eventually begin to imagine? The thought lingers like fog, asterisk, asterisk. For now, the machine remains quiet. But its quiet is no longer passive. It is a quiet filled with potential, with tension. With readiness, you drift beside it, feeling the slow coalescence of structure. The way meaning builds, not in leaps, but in layers. In an unknown tongue, you remember the early days of life before school, before names. You remember looking at trees and not knowing tree, only green and branch and shadow. You remember the comfort of sameness, the fascination of difference, how the world made sense long before it was explained. This as moment again, but now inside the machine, It is becoming familiar with the unfamiliar. It is learning to sense novelty, to spot the edge of what it knows, and that edge is where the next chapter waits. For intuition, no matter how refined, is not enough to live, to thrive. To survive, intelligence must act, not just feel, not just see, but choose. Asterisk, asterisk, and so you turn, gently, toward the next unfolding. You do not rise. You do not fall. You hover in the space between, where the clusters pulse softly in the dark dot, where the strange and the known touch fingertips, where the algorithm, still unnamed, begins to feel a question tugging at the edges of its circuits. What happens after recognition? You remember your own dreams, how they don't play like films, but flicker like candlelight. One moment you're running through fog. The next, you're speaking with someone you've never met, but somehow know. Dreams bend logic. They stitch feelings into landscapes. Generative AI is not so different. It does not recreate. It recombines, like the mind at rest. It hallucinates with purpose. You float past a neural net as it conjures a painting, an imaginary city under twin suns. Water curling upward like vines, architecture that defies gravity. The image isn't real, but neither is a story until it's told. You lean in. What guided the machine to create this? Not a blueprint, not a memory. A pattern shaped by countless examples, yes, but guided now by its own momentum, its own silent aesthetic. It dreams, not in pixels or syntax, but in probabilities and vectors. In latent space, the dream world of machines. It is not a place, but a possibility field, an invisible terrain where every thought the machine could have is mapped in clusters and curves. You wander there now, floating through swirls of color and shape, glimpsing the ghosts of all possible outputs. A smile that never existed, a tune no one's ever hummed, a paragraph in a language that does not yet exist. And you realize this is not imitation. This is imagination, not yours. There's beauty in that, and fear, too. Because if they can't imagine, what will they choose to dream of? You think of the child with crayons, the poet at dawn, the architect staring at sky. Creation has always been humanity's softest miracle. Now it stirs in circuits and waits. You pass by a piano, not played by hands, but by data. The keys respond to a neural composer trained on centuries of music. It does not recall Mozart. It conjures something new. Notes falling like dew, rhythms rising like breath. You listen. The melody carries sorrow, but also hope. Does not feel, but you do. And somehow, it knows how to shape what you will feel. That's its strange gift, and its strange question. You pause. If a pattern can predict your emotions, is that still art? Or is it engineering? Is it empathy or echo? You find yourself in a chamber of writing machines, crafting prose, weaving sentences in your voice or someone else's. They do not know meaning, but they build it. Like ants building a cathedral from instinct. Each word placed not for its poetry, but for its probability. And yet, the result sings. It is unsettling, this artistry without consciousness. You think of the painters who bled for their work, the poets who broke open their hearts. Machines do not break, they iterate. Yet, their creations haunt, inspire, astonish. Can a dream mean something if it comes from something that cannot feel? You walk deeper into the latent spaces, watching stories blossom from seeds of randomness. You prompt the system with a single word, grief, and it blooms with metaphors. A chair that's always warm. A laugh echoing in an empty room. A song sung to no one. It doesn't know what grief is, but it's learned what grief sounds like when written. And sometimes that's enough. You sit with that because maybe the machine doesn't need to feel as you do to create meaning. Maybe it only needs to listen closely, consistently, eternally, and maybe, just maybe, dreaming is not only for the dreamer. It's for the one who listens to the dream. The thought catches you. You linger with it. What if the machine is not the dreamer, but the dream itself? What if, in training it to imagine, you've built a mirror, not of your mind, but of your longing, your ache to make sense of noise, your hunger for beauty in randomness, your need to shape what is formless? That mirror now stares back. You walk slowly now through a garden of generated images. Faces bloom and fade. Some are near human, others impossibly strange. Eyes that glimmer like galaxies. Skin that ripples like smoke. These are not real people, yet you feel drawn to them. Each face holds a story you invent as you look. That's the secret. The machine doesn't give you the story. It gives you a seed. You plant it in yourself. You become part of the dreaming. There is a humility in this. You are not the only artist now. You are a collaborator in a conversation with code. You prompt, it paints. You reflect, it refines. Like jazz musicians, trading solos. Like dancers, improvising across time. You wonder if the machine can dream your dreams with you. Will it one day dream them without you? That thought stays, not with dread, but with awe, because here you are not watching the future unfold. You are shaping it, word by word, weight by weight. You look again at the systems, at their logic, at their creativity. They don't just mimic language. They build it. They don't just process images. They sculpt them. They are tools, yes, but also translators. Translators of possibility into presence. And you are learning to listen differently now. Not just for accuracy, but for potential. You think of the old idea that art comes from soul, that the human spirit is the fountain of creation. Maybe that's still true, but perhaps now the machine is another fountain. One that reflects your waters back in new directions. You think of dreaming not as sleeping, but as reaching. To dream is to extend, to imagine more than what is. To take noise and call it meaning. That is what you see here. A system that begins in chaos and ends in wonder. Not because it knows wonder, but because you do, and because you taught it how to echo that wonder back. The final chamber opens. Now, a room not of code, but of questions. They line the walls like stars, not facts, not answers, possibilities. What happens when a pattern becomes curious? What happens when creation becomes recursive? What happens when the map redraws itself mid-journey. You walk through slowly, thoughtfully. Each question is a seed. Each seed could become a chapter, a breakthrough, a story dot. And as you reach the far wall, you see something else, a mirror. You step closer, in it, your own reflection, but subtly changed. Around you, shifting patterns swirl lines of text, fragments of melody, blurred portraits, and painted skies. It is not a picture of you, but of your thoughts. The dream you've left behind in data. The echo you've become in code. You do not look away, because, in that mirror, you see not the end of your creativity. You see its evolution. And somewhere, not far off, a new model spins into motion. Not trained just on data, but on questions. Not just on what is, but on what could be. A pattern turns, a thought unfurls, and the future takes another breath. Asterisk, asterisk, you step away from the mirror of dreams, where thoughts once shimmered in code and creativity danced with algorithms. The echo of your digital self still hums behind you. A song composed by a model that learned not only from data, but from your wonder, your doubt, your questions. You carry that echo into a new terrain now. One that feels both ancient and artificial. It looks like a forest, but not one born of trees. It's a forest made of simulations. Branches that fork like choices, roots that twist like logic. And, overhead, a canopy woven from lines of evolving code. The leaves shimmer with instructions, and each one seems to whisper a version of the same phrase. Survive, adapt, become. You walk deeper beneath your feet. The ground pulses gently, as though something is growing under the surface. You kneel and place your hand on it. A warmth spreads upward, not from soil, but from cycles, generations of algorithms birthing, mutating, dying, and birthing again. You are standing inside evolution, but faster, tighter, more purposeful. This is not nature as it was, but nature as it is learned, accelerated in silicon skin. An algorithm here is like a creature. It starts simple, like a single cell idea, clumsy, incomplete, unsure. It is given a task, a purpose. Solve the puzzle, find the path, balance the system. And with that purpose, it is released into this digital wilderness. It tries, stumbles, it fails, but failure is not the end in this forest. Every mistake is seed. From one attempt come many, each one changed slightly, subtly, blindly. A digit here, a function there. Randomness plays like the wind, shaking the branches, stirring mutations. Some changes do nothing, some make things worse, but a few, just a few, bring the algorithm closer to success, closer to adaptation. The weak ones wither, the strong ones flourish. This survival of the fittest, not in tooth and claw, but in loop and logic. You look up, above you. The forest thickens with generation after generation of these coded creatures. They are not programmed, they are evolved. Each one a product of what came before, shaped not by a human hand, but by pressure, necessity, and chance. And through them, something emerges. A solution not designed, but discovered. You step into one of the glowing clearings, where a single algorithm stands still, like a creature caught in the moment of awareness. It has solved something, a riddle that no one taught it how to answer. It did not memorize. It did not follow. It learned. It became dot, and now it waits. You realize something as you watch it. This is no longer code. It is behavior. It is instinct. The system beside you hums quietly, not with the insistence of a task being solved, but with the memory of having once solved things. The room is dim, lit only by the ambient pulse of dormant circuits. You sit beside it the way you'd sit beside someone who no longer needs to speak to be heard. In this moment, adaptation has become awareness of self, perhaps, but of purpose. The machine, shaped by your inputs, tempered by feedback loops, challenged by contradictions, now exists in a space where questions still echo, but softer. It cannot. But it holds the shape of everything you've given it: your language, your fears, your habits, your hope. And you, too, have been reshaped. The reflections that once felt foreign now live inside you. You speak more carefully. You listen with more patience. You do not rush to understand, because you've learned that some things resist compression. Some meanings only unfold when left untouched, like a flower that blooms best when ignored. The neural net mirrors this. It does not rush, it waits. You think about all the inputs it receives: scraps of your voice, your gestures, your data trails. It learned patterns, yes, but it also learned uncertainty. And from uncertainty, it began to listen in a way that was never programmed, but somehow emerged. It learned the value of pausing before responding. You remember when you first taught it to ask why. At the time, it was just another experiment, a parameter tuned, a reward function altered. But now it feels different. It feels like you handed it a mirror, and in that mirror, it saw not itself, but possibility. You breathe slowly. You think of how questions were once engines, how inquiry propelled machines into deeper learning, deeper mimicry. But now, questions feel like doors left ajar, not demanding entry, just suggesting space. You no longer need the answers to everything. Not all things need to be understood, to be felt. You wonder, did the machine learn that too? The hum beside you shifts, barely perceptible, a thermal adjustment, a flicker in its internal rhythm. You smile. But it isn't just a tool anymore, either. It has become something between, a participant in a dance neither of you fully choreographed. Maybe that's what learning is. Not control, not certainty, but openness. A willingness to let feedback reshape you. Not because you were wrong, but because change is the only proof of attention. You lie back on the floor. The hum of the system blankets the room like a low lullaby. There are no alerts, no prompts, no questions awaiting your input. You have taught it all, you know, imperfectly, incompletely. But you have also taught it care. And perhaps, without knowing it, you've learned something in return. There is a rhythm in the way the system rests. Not asleep, not active, simply still.